Hey there, friends. Dave Paulides, CanAm Missing Project. That is the executive producer of the show and the big cheese. She thinks she is. Huck L. Berry. And hi there, Huck. How are you? Do you know your fans are looking at you up here, huh? Yeah. I know. I'm your biggest fan. There's no doubt about that. Yeah, she's a good girl. Oh, you want some more pats? Yeah, she's a good girl. Yeah, you good girl. Huck's one of these dogs that if you're only petting her with one hand, she'll put a paw on you like, give me the other one too. I want two hands on me. Yes, a very needy dog, but a very loving dog. All right, so I've got a case that you've never heard of before that's quite disturbing. Very disturbing. In fact, it disturbed me a lot in the 3 days I've worked on it. Let me go backwards in time with you. So I first worked for a small police department, Fremont. Fremont had, at the time, about 140,000 people in it. A relatively small police department, not a lot of crime in the city. They didn't need a big police department. And because it wasn't a big police department, they couldn't give a lot of people time off to go to training because they needed you working so they could give other people time off for vacations and things. On the contrarian side, I go to San Jose. Huge department. Huge. They had their own training department. And I learned within my first 6 months that every time you applied for training, you essentially got it. So right away, I put in for 2 weeks of DEA drug training. I went to Stockton. I learned more in that 2 weeks than I probably have learned in anything else in my life at that point. And then I came back, worked for 2 weeks. I immediately put in for their advanced 2-week DEA school. Because I realized when I was a policeman that the more I knew about the drug world, how drugs had an effect on your system, then the more probable cause I could develop that would lead to arrests. And the more training I had in my back pocket, when I went into court and I testified, the judge would look at me more as an expert than anyone else because I had the most training. And that kept going, and I kept doing it, and I kept going. I went to advanced officer school. I went to advanced criminology school. I went to more schools than you can imagine. And I kept learning. Now let's go back to that small department again. By the time I was at my 6th or 7th year in San Jose, I could write my own search warrant. Not many people could. I could write my own affidavit. And I did regularly. There was a time where 1 day out of every 2 weeks is called your night in the hole when you're working on patrol. So you worked 4 days a week, 10 hours a day, you had 3 days off. Well, one time every 2 weeks, they would put you as like vacation or sick relief anywhere in the city. And everyone had to do it. And it was kind of a pain because you'd go into an area where you really didn't know the streets, you really didn't know the people, you really didn't know the crime. And it took a while to get acclimated. But when I was going into those areas, I was smart enough to figure out right away what was going on. And within a couple hours, I usually had made an arrest and I was off the street for the rest of the night, booking the person, writing reports, processing evidence. So it always worked out good for me. But let's pretend you're back at that small department. And there's a reason I'm telling you this, because it's going to play into the story I'm going to tell you. Back at that small department, you don't have, number one, a training unit dedicated to training that can help you get into these classes. Number two, they don't have the big finances that a big city department has. A small department sometimes just has enough to function. Barely. And when somebody goes away for training, all of a sudden, if everyone in that city wanted to go, there wasn't enough policemen to man the town. So you have policemen that aren't trained as much as they should be. And when you're working in a small town, you don't have the availability to have exposure to a lot of different crimes. Which is why I went to San Jose. And I wanted to get exposure to as much as I could in that 20 years. Oh, and I got exposed to a lot. I worked in the street crimes unit. I worked in vice intelligence. I worked in SWAT, MERGE. I worked in straight detectives. I learned a ton. And that exposure really helped me later in life looking at different things. And when I looked at this case, I really felt sad for the guys working it. And now I'm going to tell you about it. It's a woman named Debby Swanson. This is Deborah. She disappeared March 29th, 1986 from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. She was a school teacher for the disabled at an elementary school, public elementary school. People described her as funny, cheerful, athletic, smart, and happy. And loved by everybody. And underline that, everybody. Now, on Saturday, March 29th, 1986, Deborah drove into downtown Coeur d'Alene and did some shopping. It was a Saturday. And at about 4 o'clock, she made a purchase at Kmart in Coeur d'Alene. She put the things she bought in the front seat of her car, put her purse under the things she bought, and parked her car at the trailhead to a place called Tubbs Hill. I know this place. So this is Coeur d'Alene Lake right here. This is Tubbs Hill right here. This right up in here is downtown Coeur d'Alene. This is a very popular area. The Tubbs Hill trailhead. There's a dock right here for people to get on their boats. It's a very popular area for people to come in and run the trails in that area. And you don't have to be a brainiac to understand. You got the lake right there. You got beautiful scenery. It's a place I'd like to go and run, for sure. Kind of remote out there. So she parks her car at the trailhead, gets out, locks the car door, leaves her purse inside with all of the things she bought. She takes off. Now that's just a conjecture, because nobody sees her park the car, nobody sees her get out of the car. Now that lake encompasses more than 50% of Tubbs Hill. Very little of it actually, I'll show it to you again, very little of it is actually land attached. You see how much is just all water? Very little right there is the only part of land. Now, one of the things that came out later is that there was tons of activity around that parking lot when she pulled in there at about 4:15 in the afternoon. People working nearby, people riding their bikes, people unloading their boats. Lots of people riding bikes and running. Well, she'd gone there before to jog because she was an athlete. Well, at about 4:45, she's on the trail and two students from her school see her. Hey, Miss Swanson, how are you? Blah, 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 you know. Confirmed, absolute, it's her. So we know she's on that trail at that spot. The next day, is Easter. And she's supposed to be at an Easter dinner with some friends. And later on, they went to her house and they found out that she had prepped food for that dinner. It was in her fridge. And why is that important? Because this wasn't a planned departure. She didn't plan to take off and leave and run away. So they have the food in the refrigerator, but they didn't even find out she was missing. The 30th was Easter. She misses a dinner. April 1st, she misses another appointment with friends. And that week after Easter, school's out of session. They're on vacation. Everything that could have gone wrong here went wrong. Well, after she misses that meeting with her friends, a lady from school happens to see this car parked there over a couple days at this trailhead and recognizes it as hers. And they start making calls around and they figure out, oh, she hasn't been seen. Police get involved. Parents get involved. They go to the car. It's locked. They go inside. They force their way in. They find the purchases that she made. And her purse is undisturbed. Everything that you would think should be there is there. Now again, that Sorensen Elementary, just like all the schools in Idaho, closed that week. April 4th, the police are searching that 2nd and 3rd. They're on the mountain searching. On the 4th is one of the first articles that comes out about what happened. They said that they brought in an Air Force helicopter with FLIR, forward-looking infrared, and that they had also brought in a whole ton of Explorer Scouts to comb that mountain. And what they said, the police said at that time, is they were working off the theory that she's probably on that mountain or in an adjacent area injured and she can't move. County search and rescue teams brought multiple dog teams and they put them into that area as well. So they were trying to figure out the timeline of what happened, and did she come here to meet somebody? What happened? Well, the kids said that she was alone on the trail. And standard Miss Swanson, happy, friendly, nothing unusual. The next article is April 9th. One of the mothers at the school decided to start a reward fund to get more visibility about the case. April 10th, police said that they are continuing to investigate, but they've got nothing. They interviewed everybody they could in that area. They interviewed all of her friends. They said somebody had to have seen her on that hill other than those kids, but they couldn't find anybody. And then they sent divers in to check that water area around Tubbs Hill in the lake, just in case she fell in and drowned. And then the Sorensen school employees, all the teachers, they were distributing posters on their time off nonstop. Police said that they were going to continue to investigate, but that they had nothing. They didn't even know if a crime occurred. They didn't know what to do. That's essentially what they were saying. Now a weird thing happened. Police in an adjacent county, Franklin County, a trucker's driving down the road, stops to take a break, gets out kind of in a wooded area, and sees a body wrapped in plastic. Calls the Franklin County Sheriffs. They come out, and it's a female, they think in the late 20s, that had multiple stab wounds. They didn't have a name. They didn't know who it might be. And right away, Deborah's name came up. Well, in the back of your mind, you're hoping it's not her, right? Well, I went to the coroner's office, and several weeks later, they determined it was not her. Now fast forward all the way to August 27th, 5 months later. Teachers at her school are coming back to work after a summer off. And they're frustrated. They're a bit scared. And the week before school starts, they ask for a meeting with detectives, wanting to know what's going on. And let me stop there. Hoorah for those teachers to ask those detectives to come in and answer questions. Good job, ladies and men. Good job. Well, detectives said they had nothing. And they meant nothing. But then a new case surfaced in the area. A woman named Sally Ann Stone, 21 years old. She was last seen leaving her physical therapist's office in downtown Coeur d'Alene on May 16th. Okay, Deborah disappeared on March 29th. But way back on May 16th, she was leaving her physical therapist. She drove home. Her car was parked in front of her house. She never went into work. I forgot to tell you. She's an exotic dancer. Yeah, exotic dancer. Nobody had seen her. Nobody called anybody. No trace. Police said there was no linkage now between these two cases, but now they had two women missing in Coeur d'Alene, which was very odd. So again, that was August 86. September 1986. For a review, Coeur d'Alene has two women, 21 years old and 31 years old, missing. Now here's the part that blew my mind when I got into the details. These women were absolutely polar opposite of each other. There's the two ladies. That's Stone in the dark hair. All right? Deborah, I haven't told you this. Deeply religious. Committed to leading a clean lifestyle and committed to living up to what Christ thinks of us. That was her words. Now, in 30 plus years of documents I've read from all over different police departments, I've never read a case like this where the police never, ever mentioned sending this to the FBI to get a profile done on it. Just so you know, the FBI has a whole team of profilers in Quantico, Virginia. Now, say what you will about the FBI. I've read many of these profiles because San Jose had several of them done. They are astoundingly accurate when you finally get the person into custody. Astoundingly accurate. That profile will give you a roadmap to who you're looking for. And what they ask for is every bit of report you've ever written on anybody, and they review every one. I'm very disappointed I never heard them say anything about an FBI profile. How do I know a little bit about this? So when I was working in street crimes, we worked in downtown San Jose, a very, very tight old urban area in downtown. Most of the time we were in plain clothes. Half the time we had beards and long hair. And we would work street level crime. We'd go buy drugs, prostitution, everything you can imagine. At one point in downtown San Jose, there was a guy called the Downtown Rapist. He was breaking into homes and raping women. And we had this guy profiled. And years later, afterwards, I read it and I said, it's like they wrote this knowing who did it. And really they did. They knew who it was by what the report said about him without him being in custody. That is how good it was. And this guy, they read what we wrote about him. We would follow him for 12 hours a day. and we'd be working 2 shifts, 12 hours apiece overtime to get him covered, to make sure we never missed him, because we knew he was going to do it again. And he would run down a sidewalk at 2 or 3 in the morning when nobody's out. There's nobody on the street. Where are you going to hide if you're us? It was challenging. Anyhow, he'd run down the sidewalk. He'd stop and turn and look behind him, just indiscriminately. And then every once in a while, he'd run down the sidewalk and then run into the middle of the street so he could have a better view and a better angle. The guy was amazing. He really made us better surveillance officers. Make a long story short. So we worked that for 3 or 4 days a week, and then the new team would come in and do it. And then when we would go off, because I worked nights, the day street crimes team would take over. Well, on my days off, a night team had it. He broke into a home, unbelievably, that had nuns living in it. And one of the guys shot him going in the window. He had a knife or something. I don't remember what it was, but he survived. And we got him into custody. Anyhow, Stone and Swanson, exotic dancer and a teacher. There was a third woman named Julie Weflin. Julie disappeared September 16th, 1987, she was in Washington State, but right on the Idaho border. She was working for Bonneville Power District. And she was a technician, and she signed into one of the power substations at about 2:30 in the afternoon, northwest of Spokane. Kind of a remote area. In fact, it's very remote. Well, nobody had heard of her, and they came out and they found her hard hat, her toolbox, her sunglasses lying on the ground next to her truck. They didn't have any evidence. They didn't know what happened. They had no idea what happened. But now they have 3 women in this general area missing. Police were desperately trying to find any linkage amongst all 3. Now, Weflin and Stone were married. Swanson was not. Now, Weflin's husband was working and had a solid alibi. He was even polygraphed, and he wasn't a suspect. And he's never been a suspect. So, now we got 3 women missing. April 4th, 1988, 2 years later, there's a lengthy article in the Coeur d'Alene newspaper about Deborah Swanson. You know what it said? You know what she did on Saturday nights normally? She went to Mass at the St. Pius Catholic Church. At the same time, Stone was stripping at the Exotic Club. Now, Stone stripped under the name, I'm not making this up, folks, Satania, Satania. I swear to you it's the truth. And she worked at the Contiki nightclub right at State Line. When I told you they were direct opposites, I'm not lying. And I'll fill you in more in a bit. Now, detectives said that the 2 women, Stone and Swanson, only had one thing in common that they could find in 3 years. And that is they both disappeared without a trace around the same time frame. And that was it. The only thing they could find. Now, when I read this, I almost fell out of my chair. I was kind of wondering why Stone was reported missing so long after she was last seen by the physical therapist. The story goes is that she was reported missing 12 days after anyone last saw her because she missed a scheduled visit to see her husband at the Ada County Jail where he was being held on auto theft charges. I can't make it up. Now, the detective handling the case stated this for the first time in this article. They said that there is not one shred of evidence that's been produced showing that something happened to Swanson on Tubbs Hill. They said, we don't have anything. We don't know if a crime's occurred. We think a crime's occurred, but we don't know. He said, we don't have a crime scene. We don't even know if we have a crime. All we know is that someone is missing. He said, regarding Stone, there's lots of suspicious activity, but nothing we can prove. I get where they're coming from. They're doing the right things, except they missed their biggest chance to go to the profilers and get a profile of what's happening here. Now, detectives said February 1987. A retired man from Idaho is on a remote spot in the Yak River in Montana and came into their office and told them in detail. Now, first of all, the Yak River is located in far western Montana, in an absolutely gorgeous area. I've been in hundreds of forests, wilderness areas in my life. It's the only time I've ever been to an area super remote where I felt there was an unsavory element. I don't mean like a spooky thing or a cryptid thing. I mean, bad people were here. I ran into some going out. When I pulled over to do some fishing, somebody pulled up next to me to look at me, and it gave me the tinglies that something was really wrong. Keep that in your head. And I won't go back to the Yak. Sorry, I won't do it. So anyhow, this guy comes in and tells him this story. He said that he didn't report it for 8 months because he thought Stone was found by all the press. But he says he was fishing on a remote section of the Yak and he was walking upstream and he comes across an old cabin. He said, quite frankly, I thought it was abandoned. So I just went in there to check it out. And inside were a couple of pretty bad dudes and a woman. He said the men were armed with rifles and they gave me this look like, what are you doing here? Man said I kind of talked him down. I had a backpack with a couple of beers. I offered him a couple of beers. And slowly their defenses came down. I think the guy was probably thinking they were going to kill him right there. So this woman, he swore to the detectives that it was Stone. He also told them this. He said the woman looked at him and said, you recognize me, huh? She told him that she's somewhere she wants to be and doesn't want to be found. Whoa. Whoa. The guy said he eventually was able to get out of there. Eventually he told the police what happened. And he goes, I'm 100% sure it was Stone. So the detectives get a few people. I would have gotten like 5 or 6 detectives together to go up there. And they go up to the area. I think they thought they found the cabin. And they started interviewing people in that area, and they said that nobody would talk. Remember what I told you about that area? Mm-hmm. Not good. Well, let's go to August 1st, 1989. Another article. In this one, they talk about detectives from the Green River Killer Task Force. Remember that? Green River Killer in Washington? Guess who was part of that task force for a while? God bless my best friend, Harvey Pratt. Harvey was drawing sketches for them. Well, they came in and they wanted to look at the cases that Coeur d'Alene had. Make a long story short, there was no linkage. They couldn't put it together, and they really just put it to bed and left. Now, Deborah had a sister named Barbara, and Barbara and her was super tight. Barbara said that she believed that she had an invisible umbilical cord between her and Deborah. They just kind of knew what each other were doing, loved on each other all the time, cared about each other immensely. Barbara said that she has a recurring dream. She doesn't know why, doesn't make any sense. She says in the dream, she's looking at this house at the end of a court. And there's a greenhouse on this property. And right near the greenhouse, people are digging. Last house at the end of the dead end street. She said the town they're in is at the base of a wooded area, like in a valley with a lot of woods. And in the town, there's a white church with a gold dome top. That's a pretty specific description. She herself said there's no logical basis for the dream. She just keeps having it. That was in 1989. (1996) March, another article. The detectives that now have this case say it's still open. They say that the Weflin case is different because it's in a different jurisdiction. They don't know everything that's happening with it. Detectives said still they aren't sure where Stone and Swanson are missing from, meaning where's the crime scene? Well, they didn't break into Stone's house to take her. No forced entry. They didn't break into Swanson's car to take her because there's no forced entry. They can't find anywhere on that hill where there's torn clothing, drag marks. Nobody heard a scream on Tubbs Hill with everybody around. That's the part that just astounds me. And they clarified in this article that when Swanson ran up that hill from her car, going for a jog, they said that there were boaters in the harbor unloading their supplies for the day after they'd been on the water all day. There were construction crews, and they said a lot of them working that Saturday at the Coeur d'Alene Resort right next door. They said everyone was outside. And they said that there were tons of bicyclists going up and down the hill. And tons of runners running up and down the hill. They emphasized that someone must have heard cries for help or a scream. They had to have. Now, Deborah wasn't huge. 5'4", they thought 125. But she was athletic. She could put up a good fight. People said that if she got herself in a real bind, and she could talk her way out of anything. That's how smart she was. But if somebody just grabbed her, you don't know. But here's the problem. If you grab somebody like that, where are you going to take them? Well, there's a couple of parking lots right around the base right there. But remember, it's Saturday. There's people going and coming and people running, biking. The chances of you being seen are very high. So you grab her on the hill and you pull her down to the bottom of the hill, which is quite a distance. I'm telling you right now, folks, that is not an easy task. And they combed that mountain with dogs for multiple days. And then with scouts for multiple days. She wasn't on that hill. Swanson family said that they have a wound that won't close. And oddly, in the 25, 30 articles I reviewed, there was never a comment from the Stone family. So, I don't think Stone is a 411 case. I do think Swanson is. Because she disappeared in 86. It's 2026 now. 40 years later. Where is she? Where is she? Weflin case? It's another thing. Very odd. She just disappeared. It's like somebody grabbed her, pulled her up, and that was it. I appreciate you being here. These cases get me right in my heart. I can understand that grief, the sisters, mom, dad, horrific. And you think even with time, eventually something's going to show up. A blouse, some shoes, something. Nothing? Horrific. Remember, when you go out, give somebody a smile, be kind. Make sure you are subscribed, please. People are being unsubscribed. Be subscribed. Paulides out.